I was out shopping in a town I rarely visited when I saw something that left me frozen in place. My husband and my mother, walking arm in arm, kissing openly in public. The shock hit me like a wave. Without thinking, I ran straight up to them and confronted them. But instead of guilt or embarrassment, they barely reacted, as if nothing was wrong. I didn't stay to argue. I turned around and went straight to my parents' house. I told my father everything and immediately filed for divorce. I cut all ties with both of them. Not long after, my father passed away. Time moved forward, and I hadn't seen my mother or my ex-husband in a long time, until one day, I ran into them again. My mother looked different. She wore loose-fitting clothes, but it was obvious. Her belly was swollen. She saw me staring and smirked. "Oh, you noticed?" she said. "I'm having his child. Unlike you, I didn't have to wait forever. It happened right away." My ex-husband stood beside her with a grin. "I finally get to be a father. Leaving you was the best choice I ever made." They wanted their words to hurt, but they didn't. Instead, I laughed. "You both look ridiculous. My name is Claire, and I'm 24 years old, working in an office job. My parents had me young. My mother was still in high school when she got pregnant, and my father was 4 years older. Their marriage was rushed, forced by the situation. My mother had been obsessed with my father, pursuing him relentlessly until he gave in. People around them disapproved, but with a baby on the way, they had no choice but to accept it. At first, their marriage seemed fine. As a child, I remember my father picking me up from school when it rained. I loved walking home with him under an umbrella, talking about my day. People always commented on how young and cool he looked, and to me, he was. Then everything changed. My father had an accident at work. He fell from scaffolding and suffered serious injuries. He survived but was permanently disabled. That was the moment my mother turned on him. She refused to help him, no hospital visits, no support at home. When he collapsed in the hallway, unable to get up, she walked past him without a second glance. "Pathetic," she muttered. "Marrying you was a mistake." She constantly complained about him. Even as a child, I saw it for what it was. She was picking on him, looking for reasons to resent him. I never liked her much. My father, despite everything, took care of me. We weren't well off, and since my mother worked nights, I spent most of my time with him. I was always closer to him than I was to her. After high school, my mother insisted I start working instead of going to college. "We need money," she said, so I got a job at a small company. My father looked at me with guilt. "I hate that you have to do this because of me," he said. "Don't worry about it," I told him. I worked hard not for my mother but for him. Eventually, I married Raymond, a coworker. I wanted a warm, loving family, the opposite of what I grew up with. He promised, "I'll take care of you, Claire. Let's be happy together. I want a big family." His words gave me hope, and I agreed. But a year passed, and we had no children. I wanted kids, but nothing happened. Raymond's frustration grew. "Why can't you get pregnant?" he asked. "All my friends have kids by now. Something must be wrong with you." "It's not just me," I said. "We should both get checked." He scoffed. "Why should I? I've never had health problems. This is your fault." The pressure only got worse from there. When I brought up the idea of infertility treatment, hoping Raymond would support me, he refused to listen. Instead, he blamed me completely. "Stop making excuses and go to the hospital," he snapped. "You're ruining my reputation. What kind of wife can't have children?" No matter what I said, he wouldn't hear it. To him, I was the only problem. Even so, I kept trying, holding on to the hope that one day we'd have a child. But time passed, and nothing changed. Raymond started coming home less and less. He would arrive in the early morning, claiming work kept him late. But I had doubts. Was he really working? Or was there someone else? The signs were there. Once, I caught the scent of another woman's perfume on his clothes, not just once, but multiple times. Then I noticed unusual transactions on our credit card statements, expenses that had no explanation. My suspicions grew, but I kept waiting for the right moment to confront him. I knew if I asked outright, he'd just deny everything. That opportunity came sooner than expected. One day, I went shopping in a town I rarely visited. That's when I saw him, Raymond, on his supposed workday. I was about to call out to him, but then I saw her. My mother. She was walking beside him, smiling. I froze. I had barely spoken to my mother since getting married. I would visit my father occasionally, but I never brought Raymond along. As far as I knew, my mother and my husband had little to no contact. So why were they together? I stayed back and watched. Then, to my absolute horror, they held hands and kissed. My heart pounded. My head spun. This couldn't be real. Without thinking, I yelled, "Hey, Raymond! Mom! What are you doing?" They stopped and turned, clearly startled by my presence. "Oh, Claire, why are you so upset?" my mother asked, feigning innocence. "What do you mean, why? What are you two doing together?" She smiled as if nothing was wrong. "I just happened to run into Raymond. We were catching up." "Is that so strange?" She was lying. I knew it. I stepped closer, and that's when it hit me, the scent of her perfume. It was the exact same fragrance I had smelled on Raymond's clothes before. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth was right in front of me. "Don't lie to me. I saw you two kissing." My mother and Raymond exchanged a quick, panicked glance. But the moment passed, and Raymond sighed, his expression shifting from surprise to indifference. "Well," he said, "I didn't think I'd get caught this soon." My breath caught in my throat. "Why are you here, Claire?" he asked, almost annoyed. "I thought I had more time before you figured it out." He wasn't even trying to deny it. "I prefer older women," he continued. "Your mother was my type from the start." I felt sick. My mother stood beside him, unfazed. "Oh, Claire, don't be so dramatic," she said casually. "We just happened to reconnect. We had tea, talked, and well, one thing led to another." Raymond shrugged. "I'm still young. I wanted a real romance, something exciting. Our marriage was never great anyway. Your mother actually listens to me." I clenched my fists. "Besides," my mother added, "Raymond wanted a son, but that's impossible with you." I stared at her, stunned. "How can you say that?" I asked. "Because it's true," Raymond cut in. "You can't have children. It's your fault." The betrayal sank in deeper. The very thing I had struggled with, the pain I had suffered in silence, he had used against me. And now, he had shared everything with my mother. I couldn't hold back my anger any longer. "Do you even hear yourselves? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Raymond scoffed. "It is what it is. You're a terrible wife. You couldn't even give me a child." I had heard enough. "I don't want a husband like you," I said coldly. "I want a divorce." His reaction was instant, relief. "Finally," he said. "Honestly, Claire, I've had enough of you for a long time." I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to show weakness. "You're never going to have children," he added cruelly. "I'm just glad to be rid of you." Beside him, my mother smirked. "Oops," she said with mock sympathy. "I didn't mean to steal your husband." My voice was steady. "If I tell Dad about this, he'll leave you." Her smirk faded. Now, I had their attention. Hearing my words, my mother's face momentarily paled, but she quickly regained her composure. "There's no actual proof of adultery," she said with a smirk. "If you want to divorce Raymond, go ahead. As for me, I'll get a divorce when I feel like it. So stay out of my business." Then she turned to Raymond. "Let's go." Without another word, the two of them walked away, completely indifferent to the damage they had caused. Unlike Raymond, my mother didn't seem in a rush to leave my father. She wanted control over the situation. I didn't waste a second. I went straight to my parents' house and told my father everything. He sat quietly for a moment, his face filled with bitterness. Even after all these years, I put up with her for your sake, he said. I never thought she would turn her back on her own daughter like this. I took a deep breath. I'm divorcing Raymond. After what he's done, there's no way I can stay married to him. But what about you, Dad? What are you going to do? Don't worry, he said firmly. I have a plan. I won't let them get away with this. The divorce happened quickly. Raymond mailed me a completed divorce form, expecting me to simply sign it, and I did. Meanwhile, my mother never returned home. She had completely abandoned my father and was living with Raymond. I was furious, but my father told me to let them go. They aren't worth your energy, he said. Forget about them. I focused on moving forward. I packed up my things, left the apartment I had shared with Raymond, and returned to my childhood home. My father, surprisingly, was in better shape than before. Without my mother around to ignore him, he had been taking care of himself, growing stronger every day. It's strange, he admitted one evening. She never helped me, but somehow, that forced me to learn how to manage on my own. And now I'm still here, standing on my own 2 feet. For the first time in a long while, we found some peace. But it didn't last. Out of nowhere, my father fell seriously ill. He developed pneumonia, and his condition declined rapidly. One evening, as I sat by his bedside, he took my hand in his weak grip. I'm sorry for everything you had to endure, he whispered. From now on, live your life for yourself. Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. Just hours later, he passed away. It felt unreal. One moment I had him, and the next, he was gone. I should have done more for him while I still had the chance. While making arrangements for his funeral, an unwelcome presence arrived at the house. Long time no see, a voice sneered. I turned around and saw my mother. And beside her, Raymond. They walked in as if they belonged there, grinning like they had won some kind of prize. What are you doing here? I snapped. Get out. What? My mother scoffed. I'm his wife, remember? When a husband dies, his wife naturally comes to claim what's hers. I clenched my fists. You ran off and abandoned him. You had no contact for years. She waved a hand dismissively. Say whatever you want. The fact is, I'm still legally his wife. That means I have rights to his estate. Realization struck me like a slap. This was why she never divorced him. It had nothing to do with love or guilt. She stayed legally married so she could take whatever he had left. My father had worked tirelessly, even after retiring from construction. He built a solid reputation at the company he joined, earning the respect of his coworkers. He never cared about material things, so he saved every penny he could. And now, my mother was here to take it all. Let's get straight to the property division, she said, stepping closer. That's when I noticed something. Her clothes were loose, but her belly was clearly swollen. She caught me looking and grinned triumphantly. Oh? You noticed? She placed a hand on her stomach. I'm pregnant with Raymond's child. She smirked. Unlike you, I didn't have to wait forever. It happened right away. Raymond stood beside her, nodding. Leaving you was the best decision I ever made. Their words were designed to break me, but they didn't. Instead, I laughed, loud, uncontrollable laughter. They stared at me, confused. What's so funny? Raymond asked, frowning. I caught my breath and shook my head. I'm just wondering, are you sure that baby is yours? His expression darkened. What kind of question is that? I turned to my mother. Her smirk was gone. Her eyes darted away, her face suddenly uneasy. But Raymond didn't seem to notice her reaction. Of course it's mine, he snapped. Stop talking nonsense just because you're bitter. Am I bitter? I smiled. You'll know soon enough. I turned, picked up a folder I had kept hidden, and held it up for them to see. Their faces changed the second they saw it. Raymond's brows furrowed. What's that? My mother's face went pale. Oh, don't be so surprised, I said. It's nothing special, just an investigative report. Their eyes widened as I slowly opened the folder. The truth was about to come out. Hearing my words, my mother's face briefly lost its color, but she quickly regained her usual smug expression. There's no real proof of adultery, she said dismissively. If you want to divorce Raymond, go ahead. As for me, I'll end my marriage when I decide. So stay out of it. Then she turned to Raymond. Let's go. Without another glance at me, they walked away together. Despite their blatant affair, my mother wasn't in any rush to divorce my father. She wanted control, just as she always had. I refused to let it slide. I went straight to my parents' house and told my father everything. He listened silently, his face filled with a bitterness I had never seen before. Even after everything, I stayed with her for your sake, he said finally. I never imagined she would betray not just me, but you too. I nodded, my chest tight with anger. I'm divorcing Raymond. There's no way I can stay with him after what he's done. But what about you, Dad? What are you going to do? A determined look crossed his face. Don't worry, he said. I won't let them get away with this. Raymond wasted no time. Days later, I received a completed divorce form in the mail. No conversation, no explanation, just paperwork. I signed it immediately. My mother never returned home. She and Raymond had eloped, cutting all ties. I was furious, but my father told me to let them go. They aren't worth your energy, he said. Forget them. And so I tried. I moved out of the apartment I had shared with Raymond and returned home. Ironically, my father was doing better without my mother. Without her constant neglect, he had learned to take care of himself. You know, he said one evening, she never helped me with anything. Maybe that's why I learned to manage on my own. For a while, life felt peaceful. But it didn't last. One day, my father fell seriously ill. Pneumonia hit him hard, and his condition deteriorated fast. As I sat by his bedside, he took my hand weakly. I'm sorry for everything you had to endure, he whispered. From now on, live for yourself. Tears blurred my vision as I nodded. Hours later, he was gone. It felt unreal. I had just gotten him back, and now he was taken from me. I should have done more for him while I had the chance. As I prepared for his funeral, the last person I wanted to see walked through the door. Long time no see, my mother said with a smirk. Raymond stood beside her. They strolled into the house like they belonged there, wearing smug expressions. What are you doing here? I snapped. Get out. My mother feigned surprise. What do you mean? I'm his wife. When a husband dies, it's only natural for the wife to handle things. I clenched my fists. You ran off. You abandoned him. You had no contact for years. She shrugged. Say what you want. The fact remains, I'm still legally his wife. That means I have a right to his estate. I inhaled sharply. So this was why she never divorced him. She had stayed legally married, waiting for this moment. My father had worked tirelessly, even after retiring from construction. He had built a strong reputation at his company, saving every penny he could. And now, my mother was here to take it all. Let's get to the property division, she said smoothly, stepping closer. Then I noticed something. Her loose clothing couldn't hide the obvious swell of her stomach. She followed my gaze and smirked. Oh? You noticed? She ran a hand over her belly. I'm pregnant with Raymond's child. I said nothing, but she continued. Unlike you, I didn't have to wait forever. It happened right away. Raymond nodded beside her. Leaving you was the best decision I ever made. Their words were meant to crush me, but they didn't. Instead, I laughed. Loud, uncontrollable laughter. They stared at me, confused. What's so funny? Raymond demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still grinning. I just have one question. Are you sure that baby is yours? His expression darkened. What kind of question is that? I turned to my mother. Her smirk disappeared. Her eyes darted away, her face suddenly uneasy. But Raymond didn't notice. Of course it's mine, he snapped. You're just bitter. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm not bitter, I said, walking over to a drawer. You'll know soon enough. I pulled out a thick folder and held it up for them to see. Their faces changed instantly. Raymond frowned. What's that? My mother's face went pale. Oh, don't be so surprised, I said. It's nothing special, just an investigative report. Their eyes widened as I slowly opened the folder. The truth was about to come out.